Hello, welcome to another tutorial video. This time we're going to be looking at An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. Brilliant play. We'll be looking at it in three areas: the way it's written, the themes, and the characters. The reason I start with the way it's written is because it's really good to try and get your head around, should I say, what the writer is trying to do, and then that kind of informs the way you look at the themes and the way you look at characters, because you can kind of see which characters the writer is choosing to use as a vehicle for certain things. So it's good to focus on that. I'll go into a little more about essay perfection or essay kind of detailing in another video as well, but obviously there's the old ones, the 7 original tutorial videos that will give you a good start. So here we look at, first of all, the way it's written. Well, there's a big difference in the time it's set to the time it was written. So obviously what's actually on stage is basically set in 1912, but he's writing it in 1945 at the end of a war, so it's a real change. So even for people after the war, this would have seemed like a real bygone era. This would have been a memory of something to them, because obviously over the war all of this would have been largely irrelevant to a point because of the way that the war changed the way people interacted in Britain at the time. And it's a warning of basically how things were, and also using that time contrast between the setting and the time of writing is a real warning to people to I invite them not to go back to the past, to really bear in mind that things were bad and we don't want to go there again. We've got to change. So it's always stressing this time of rethinking an opportunity to actually make that change and actually build something. And maybe society took it on heart at large, with the introduction of the NHS and job seekers allowances, etc. Maybe there was a lot better provision for the people who were kind of lower down in societal ranks. It's all set again in one place, which kind of builds up a lot of the tension, really kind of makes it come through that they're in the kind of this kettle house, and just being in this one place kind of shows you again that the one thing that's always stressed is that microcosm. What's going on here is going on as a representation for the whole country, so it's something that everyone needs to learn from, and it's something that will affect everyone, because the one house there could be any house, especially in the upper classes who would have been going to the theatre at the time to watch such a thing. Again, just to really drill that home on the setting and time of writing, Priestley's bringing back an era that people kind of accepted. There wasn't really much that people were able to do about this class division that was very prevalent at the time, between the upper class and then the middle class and the lower class. And it's also obviously against ideologies, like kind of setup of ideologies of the socialism that Priestley would champion, and obviously the capitalism or early capitalism that was prevalent during the late 19th, early 20th century. So you want to think about all those kind of contrasts in the setting and the time. If you mention a couple of points about that, you're going to be onto a good thing. So the language and dialects throughout, basically we don't have too many, but we've got a real sense that these are well-to-do people, and we can see from Mr. Burling's kind of slight hints in his accent, etc., and some of the things he says, and even just the directness with some of the things he says, we see that he's not fully from this class that his wife is from, and obviously it's kind of put so in the text as well. And his children have grown up into that world above. They're more like his mother more like their mother, should I say, in the way that they actually communicate with each other. So basically we realize that they're both of a kind of upper class, even though the mother's of a higher class, etc. And then there's kind of like people, because it will show you that people will work towards trying to be upper class, trying to be in this level society, but as a character and as a person, the person it makes you, it might not be the best thing for you. So the accents obviously show the class, like with Mr. Burling being higher than Mr. Burling, and also shows their standing and the authority and intimidation. Like you'll notice a lot of the time the language and the words that Mr. Burling uses, especially at the beginning, to try and intimidate the inspector, it's a lot of name dropping, and there's a lot of kind of bragging about self, to try and make the inspector, or should I say remind the inspector of what he presumes is the inspector's place. But obviously, as we know, by the end of the play, the inspector isn't from Earth, so there is no place, quote unquote, for him. The lighting and the timing throughout are really important. Obviously the spotlights on the characters, and obviously when the inspector kind of comes in, the lighting changes, I think, and when we open up and we've kind of got this set kind of red light, like almost danger, a reddish light, kind of pinkish glow, this kind of danger just to start us off, just with this feeling of something's going to go unease. And then obviously when the lights come on, it's like the inspector's inspecting them under a spotlight, etc. So look out obviously for the scene changes, etc., where it actually happens, the timing of those. Like one of them happens when Eric just walks back in, when they've just discussed who the father of the Eva's child was, etc. And also when the inspector first comes in, that interruption to Mr. Burling's speech about how great capitalism is. And also look at how when people come and go, I mean, Gerald leaves and returns, at the perfect timing, etc. This is just all part of his craft to give us this full story and picture Priestley's craft to give us this full story and picture in such a short space of time, because it all happens over a night. So in the structure then, it all happens over a night. It's a very kind of short time frame, it feels quite intimate for it. He goes through inspecting all of them and asking questions of all of them, interrogating all of them, whichever way you want to put it. And basically it's all set up after this, just before the phone call of the real death of Eva Smith, or of the young girl that's actually been called up. So it's kind of really kind of loops back on itself. So you want to get the idea of that round. The structure comes back round. We go through something, and then because there's no consequence, some of the characters just go back to where they were. Some of them do, some of them don't, and then we start again. And we're just left to think that this kind of recurs. And there might be a lot that Priestley's saying in that, there's a lot of people who haven't learned, and there's, maybe even for the whole thing we've actually been through this idea before. Maybe there was another change that we could have had after World War One, but we haven't fully realised it. There's a lot he could be saying in there. He goes through them all one by one. He goes one line of inquiry at a time, so he really wanted to kind of pick them out. And that's good, just to mention that he's going to slowly show the audience like the breakdown of each person. It's not just kind of he comes and goes, you're all responsible, and runs out again. He wants to break through them one by one so we can feel the different levels that we believe they're responsible. And also there's certain things that we see or we relate to that we might find of kind of more of a starker sin, or things that we might not dislike. I mean, you can pick who you think is the most risible of all the characters. My personal is Mrs. Burling. Can't stand her, but in that way, obviously, she's built as a great character. And obviously, that sense of building guilt and shared responsibility is one of the key themes. That's to try and get that across, and it's put to us by the structure of going through each one individually, showing how responsible they each were. And also, there's a really interesting point that you might want to notice here. I should really put a question mark here, because this is obviously like, if you can talk about this, do it. There's setups, even though we kind of got this stereotype of Sheila at the beginning, just being this materialistic girl, etc. We've got this setup at the beginning where she's got a little intuition, where she can see, or she knows that Gerald's up to something, and so she kind of sees through. So there's kind of been a setup there. We know that she's going to have this insight. So when she comes to actually show us this insight on a grander scale with her acceptance of the inspector's ideas, we can really see that she had that perception. We knew she had it, so it kind of sets us up for seeing her that way. And also, the mother, Mrs. Burling's her arrogance on the name. That's a really great setup, I think, because she starts with, "I'm Mrs. Burling, don't you know?" Probably not in such a lame accent, but at the end, it's the name, or her kind of arrogance with the name is what kind of is a huge undoing, because it's Eva's quote unquote use of her name as Burling that actually kind of prejudices her against the Eva's case. So that kind of setup with the name being such a something you're so proud of, and then falling on it, it's a great setup as well. It kind of builds a real sense of intrigue throughout, or at least it rewards rewatching and reading, excuse me. So some of the themes that they cover, well, there's class, obviously. We're looking at the level of workers' rights. People weren't allowed to go to, you weren't allowed to talk to people in a certain way. You weren't allowed to kind of look at them a certain way. You weren't expected to get, breaks and lunch breaks, and you wouldn't have paid lunch breaks. You wouldn't have paid sick days, all this kind of thing at the time. And then you were just expected to accept that. So, you had the lower classes being treated a certain way, and that was just your lot in life. You kind of served and you worked, and you didn't have the kind of respect or treatment. You were there to serve rather than there to actually live a life as well, or at least that's how it's kind of painted to us now. And also, obviously, Priestley here, he wanted to say, this isn't right. Everyone should have equal access to, and that would include healthcare provision. At this time, some people, just because there wasn't like an NHS dentist, you got toothache, you actually died from like inflamed toothache. In some cases, or if you had a hernia, you just walked around the rest of your life with your hernia because you couldn't afford. There was no NHS to actually sort you out, as it were. So the onset there of what, the expectation of what different people in society could have was markedly different. And this is one of the things that Priestley was trying to get across, was that, all levels of class should have rights and should have expectations of healthcare, etc. And also the hypocrisy, of the cast. We see like Eva, is kind of honest, hardworking. She shows she shows kind of great integrity in not accepting Eric's money when she finds out that it's stolen. But then you can compare that to I think it's Judge McGarity, who is leching on a woman in that dirty kind of the seedy part of town, etc. And what's Gerald doing there? Question mark. It's just not really right for people who are supposed to have all these rights and luxuries and like standing within society to actually be able to do these kind of things. And so Priestley shining a light on that. So look forward to society as well, how it will be shaped, what society could be, or where we'll be if we don't change things, where the line is drawn. Are we going to just let Eva's death go into nothingness, or is someone going to be responsible for it? What are the consequences going to be? And obviously there's the idea of like promoting socialism against capitalism. So basically, you can look at this as Eva v. Berling, in a sense, the kind of ideology that was put there. Obviously Eva's not championing socialism, just we're seeing it through her life that if she'd had more support and more equality, she can't just get sacked from a job just because someone who was a higher class than her doesn't like the way she looked at her. Obviously we're going to have a very different level of society. If you can imagine that actually happening. I don't notice things like that so much in England, but I remember one time being in America and seeing something in a store where one person of a certain class just literally asked another person their name, and all the people that serving, they just went absolutely silent, because they knew as soon as asked the name, if it was reported, they'd be in huge trouble, and that was very saddening. But obviously different societies have it differently. Egypt and India, for example, completely more class-ridden than I think England is now, but that's neither here nor there. But although you can actually link that into, if you want to do research on that, you can look into like different ways of society and strata society. If you want to look at a caste system for, say, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., you might find an angle to bring that in. So one of the other themes is responsibility, taking charge of one's own actions and understanding the consequences, as some of the Berlings do and some of the Berlings don't, and some of the Berlings do and then turn on. Every character kind of has this throughout the book. In the play, every single one of them is offered a chance to actually change their ways and learn from it. But then the people who are in the upper classes are more set in their ways, they don't. Whereas the other people learn. There's the kind of direct information that they get, about the suicide and their responsibility, and for some people, that's enough to actually make them think, I've got to change my ways. So Eva says, I'll never do anything like that again. But then Berling, he's like, I'll give thousands to try and change it. But then as soon as he realizes it's a Bajingo fake or whatever he says, then he wants to turn back. It's just gone back to time. So he's learned and unlearned, and it's also kind of showing you what you've done and the consequences. And it's also really interesting in learning the truth about yourself. You do have those arrogant moments, you do have those selfish moments, etc. For those of us wise enough to see it, or for those wise enough to learn from our mistakes, and then also seeing the truth of your loved ones. And this kind of works in both ways. When we realize that Berling's, Sheila must be so not proud of her parents when they just change back as if everything's okay, and then maybe even for Berling in some way, like looking at his son and realizing he doesn't know, and Miss Berling realizing they don't know their son. So there's a lot of kind of learning about self to go in there. Images as well, images in terms of how do we look to people. So basically Berling, obviously one of the main things that he's worried about is the scandal that might come out of this, whereas say Sheila doesn't really care about that. She wants to try and make amends full scale, whereas Berling's obviously just worried about what the papers will say and how things are. And also even there's undertones in it when Mrs. Berling actually says with regards to important men having important business and you'll just get used to it. It's kind of like, just this acceptance in society that perhaps powerful men have affairs and, they can get away with it and it's not really a problem. You can link that back to a Clinton case if you wish. But I think it's just an interesting angle to think about it and how things look to people. Obviously, because when we start, everyone's like, Berling's like, well, I didn't have anything to do with it. And then we don't really see the chain of reaction that actually goes. And we have this whole kind of family neatly is involved with this woman's life. And also the idea of how do you want to be seen? How do you want people to actually remember you and look at you? I think this is most interesting in the case of Gerald. I think Gerald's the most kind of deluded in how he thinks people see him and also how he kind of comes across. But the subtext there is, he's just one deluded man. He thinks he's doing this good thing when he knows there's no future in it, and he should be the more responsible. And he should be. He probably made Eva's life the bitterest, because whereas the others were cruelest to her, actually we'll come to this more in his character, but whereas the others were cruelest to her, he showed her like kind of a zenith of life that she would never get again. She would never get again. There's not very many people like Gerald around. And then he dropped her. So even though the others kind of hurt her, I think that one hurt her the most, because she And in fact, the inspector says so much when she says she went away after that. It just kind of like, she'd never get again. Whereas before, she could deal with knockbacks, but to be taken high and dropped, maybe that's a lot harsher. So also one of the other images is change. How long do we change? To what extent do we change? How much is there? So obviously with Burling in that, Burling and Mrs. Burling, there's kind of a time limit that they change for. And then obviously they go back. And the extent is, Burling just thinks, if I could, I would. But obviously there at the end, when the inspector's found out to be not who he says he was, then there is a chance then to change, but obviously he goes back, so obviously that was very fake. The extent of that isn't very far. Obviously represents society, is society going to take this opportunity to change at this time, and then what's going to happen, and also kind of makes you think about what drives us, what's going to make us change. Do we want equality for people, or do we want our own kind of self-improvement, self-benefit, for us to kind of gather money and go? And again, you've got great insights into, if you look at different societies, if you compare say Finland, Norway, Sweden, with some of the more kind of classic world powers, like say the way China treats class at the moment, and obviously America. Again, there's something you might want to look into if you're interested in developing that far, or if you're doing something more than a GCSE on it. And obviously the theme is spirituality. Obviously, apparently Priestley wasn't a godly man, but he had a real conscience for people. And obviously when I say he wasn't a godly man, that's not a judgment in any way. People can be moral with or without a god figure in their lives, of course, but obviously it's touched upon here because of the character that the inspector is. Is he kind of otherworldly? Is he godly? Is he kind of prophetic? Is he from the future? Is it kind of a warning? All this kind of comes through from the inspector. Or is he just a conscience? Is he just people's kind of conscience brought to life? Some kind of sorry, that's my daughter. Some kind of spirit kind of coming through, just to show people the error of their ways and to help them improve in their lives, etc. So, moving on to characters then. With the inspector, if we want to look at some of the things for him, obviously we've got the timing of his entrance. That's really important because he breaks off Burling's speech, was representative in breaking down the kind of the capitalist idea. His manner, very kind of brisk, very to the point, doesn't kind of fumble around and, kind of pander to Burling's name dropping, etc. He's very unique in his way, again, and the others notice that. So again, you can highlight it. He's abrasive, he'll just kind of get the job done. He doesn't care who he pleases or doesn't please, and he rushes them, moving them forward. So we get this sense from the inspector that time is really important, and in fact that should be one of the themes as well, kind of the idea of time and how things change over time, etc. But he rushes them, and in doing so, he tries to get them to a conclusion. He tries to bring about their redemption or their judgment day a lot earlier than it would be. And again, that's kind of like what a kind of preacher figure does. And again, like one of the things about Priestley you've really got to get is that the inspector, he's Priestley's mouthpiece. This is kind of like if Priestley could be in the play. If Priestley could be in the play, he'd be a lot more, he'd be the actual inspector. He'd be getting across things as the inspector. With regards to Mr. Burling, then, he's got the stereotype of being kind of an upper class man, proud of himself, what he's going to do. He's arrogant. Is he protective of his family when he wants to protect them from scandal, or is that protective of himself? Is he kind of protective as well of his reputation? Is that a good thing? Is it because he has to at that level of society? You can question that, but obviously I think in a more kind of he's kind of shown his true colours, so I think it can be argued, but it would definitely be an argue for the sake of arguing rather than actually fully believing that yes, he is a protective and caring father, especially with the revelations we find out about his son. He name drops. He likes to actually try and get things through. He likes to actually show who he's connected to, what he's done, and obviously he kind of drops the idea of a knighthood in as well. Does he see the error of his ways? Well, to what extent, even if he does? So again, you can kind of mention that there's this glimmer of redemption open for him, but then obviously he kind of poo-poos it himself. His money and power and influence, all that's really, really important to him. There's several points where you can say that, especially when he tries to fix the problem with money. His reputation is something, again, he's very proud of, and he expects the respect, and that's one thing that's really important here. Just because he is of a higher class, the inspector should, treat him with a certain level of respect. If we were reading this and the inspector was speaking such a way to someone of a lower class, maybe the expectation with that, well, he doesn't deserve, the person of a lower class doesn't deserve to be spoken to any differently. But here, Berlin's got this idea that he should be spoken to in a manner fitting of who he is. So again, that's kind of the differences in society really being put there. And there's kind of a whole visage, like his whole life, it looks good, and, he's there celebrating this engagement, and, he's got the business, but what is he really doing? He's running slave labor, he's whoring his daughter out to a family with more money. He knows nothing of his son, and even his wife's not really supremely proud of him, or at least his family aren't enough. You know, his in-laws aren't even proud enough to come to their engagement. I mean, there's a real visage in his life. He thinks it looks a certain way, but or you could say mirage even. He thinks it looks a certain way, but then obviously it's not. And unfortunately, obviously, he returns to his old ways until the second phone call comes. Then obviously, I think, you know, I mean, it's brilliant, like, kind of left there just for us to think about what he would do, what he's going to do now when the real inspector comes. So Mrs. Burling, she thinks highly of herself. You know, she thinks her reputation is all. And I put those slightly differently because, you know, that's kind of like what she thinks of. You know, she thinks highly of herself, and then she kind of acts as if her reputation is all. And there's nuances here. And obviously, you could say proud is again like, well, they sound all the same, but it's not really that. I mean, it's like kind of, this is kind of like the level of expectation she has for someone of her standing. You know, this is the way she believes she should be. But then in that again, she's proud of some of those elements, perhaps more to a point, like obviously the safeguarding, quote unquote, of the name when Eva uses it at the end. She has a high society attitude stuff. You know, she says, you know, you shouldn't say things to the cook. She mentioned something like that at the beginning. And even in a kind of like, you know, this women's group that she set up, I mean, is it just so they can kind of have, again, the mirage or the visage of actually showing people how they're going to help society and what they're going to do? Or is it like she actually genuinely wants to help? Who knows? She doesn't know her children. She doesn't know that Eric drinks, etc. And she tries to belittle Sheila and just saying, like, you know, well, your husband's going to cheat on you, deal with it, that's fine. And I think she's got the most terrible action at the end, you know, where she actually, I mean, that she was set up for it, you know, when she kind of just like dooms Eva to having no help, you know, from being here. I mean, obviously you can say like, well, you know, if each of them had known what the other had done, then obviously they'd be more likely to help. But I think especially in her case, where, I mean, like, you can forgive some other people. Obviously, I don't think you can forgive Eric, but you can forgive kind of Sheila in a way. Just say, look, you know, she was having a bad day. All people kind of give a cut or something in a bad day. Maybe not to that extent. And Mr. Burling, you know, he's a factory owner. He just wants to make money. So anyone causing trouble in, you know, reducing his profits, you can understand. But here in this you know, this place where she's set up theoretically just to help people, and then she turns someone who's in desperate need of help away on such a small thing. Obviously, that's probably the most terrible one. And obviously, there's the irony of her demanding punishment for the person who got the girl pregnant, etc. It got Eva, pregnant, and obviously her tune changes when she finds out it's Eric. Eric is a loser. Eric is drunk. He lives off his dad. You know, he's got not really much going for him at all. He's quite a pathetic person. You look at him, you don't think much of him. Gerald doesn't seem to think much of him. His sister doesn't seem to think much of him. Father doesn't know him, etc. He forces himself. I mean, obviously, I would use the word rape, but that's a really loaded word. He forces himself on Eva, etc. You know, he does disgusting thing when he's drunk. He uses class, you know, to kind of, you know, show off to her, etc. Or at least, you know, he uses kind of privileged position in his father's company to kind of get the money when he's trying to give some to Eva, etc. But he does see the error of his ways, you know, he knows, and you know, he's lost a child at the end of this, even though he didn't, you know, and he didn't, you know, he still tried with Eva to the end, but Eva kind of turned away from him because he had lower kind of integrity than her, and she didn't want to be with someone like that. And he kind of goes through the whole thing kind of afraid. You know, he knows something's up as well. You know, when people kind of mention things to him, he's like, what are you laughing at? You know, he's got this paranoia about him that afraid of paranoia about him, kind of showing that he knows he's done something wrong, which again, I guess you could kind of consider one of the setups. So Sheila, again, we mentioned this perception she had at the beginning, but she's childish and materialistic at the beginning, or at least she seems so, you know, daddy and stuff like that. But she does have that perception, and she has an instinct, you know, when she kind of picks up on the inspector's ways and actually what he's trying to get across, then he's kind of a role model for her, someone she latches onto straight away. And then we actually see the changes within her, you know, how she actually tries to then start improving immediately, and shows kind of the socialist agenda, you know, kind of all caring for one another, etc. She becomes the inspector's voice, you know, she's kind of like his kind of shadow or mime, you know, she says everything that he says. She actually completely, and when he's gone, you know, she's the one that still champions the same things. She learns lessons, and it lasts with her, you know, she's kind of got them in her mind, and you know, she's going to be changed after this if nothing else is. So I guess in that kind of, she represents the younger generation where Priestley is kind of, you know, inviting them more than anything to actually kind of take up this challenge, this gauntlet, and actually change society for the better. Then we've got Gerald. Really don't have much time for Gerald, to be honest with you. He's a stereotype of kind of the, just man about town, can use his power to do anything. He loves himself. I mean, like, he gets into this relationship with Eva, and he's like, well, at least it was nice to Eva. Well, not really, because he did it because he's got a hero complex. He did it because, he wants to feel like he's special. He did it because he makes a difference in life. I don't doubt that, he kind of felt that, Gerald would be the kind of person that was more into the fact that, Eva loved him and he loved her because she loved him, rather than loving her from her own kind of regard. And it's just really sad that, kind of he takes her up and then drops her. I mean, it's similar like just going up to a man in the street, going up to some poor guy in the street and just giving him £1,000. And then, that person from then on will always think that just being given £1,000 in the street is realistic, when, it's not gonna happen. And I think, that's one of the most destructive things for Eva. But obviously you can argue that and disagree and go whichever way you want. At least he knows he was guilty. He needs to go calm himself and walk around after he finds out what he's done, and he's sad about it. And again, he uses power. He uses power several times. He's got his friend that just happens to have a flat which he can kind of borrow. And he at the beginning, he's in that place where in the clubhouse, and he gets him to make her a sandwich and stuff like this. And he just, well, I'll just give you money and that'll keep you going. At the end, it's not really that. Yeah, I don't like him at all, but. Argue how you want for him. And there's the argue but cared for Eva, but I've already mentioned that. And then Eva, obviously Eva, the kind of the one of the most, the linchpin of this whole thing. She represents every woman. Her voice is literally not heard, and obviously I think that's kind of purposefully done. We only hear about her through others because this kind of level of society isn't really heard about at the time, and no one's championing their voice. And in fact, no one's championing their voice to the extent where someone has to come from another world, this ghoulish inspector, to from whatever like realm of consciousness he comes from, to actually kind of bring her to life in a way for us, because she's such a forgotten element of society. She's downtrodden. She tries and tries. She resorts to all sorts. She worked in a factory. She worked in a shop. She even went to. He was going to start hooking, etc., etc. She's really had a hard life, and again, it's just representing so many people who work without kind of rights and benefit society and really work themselves to the bone. And then she kills herself, as we're told at the beginning, and then we got this idea of killing herself again. Now, you can say that, oh, well, that's Eva's real, that's her really killing herself. That's what's really coming about. And obviously that from the way that the narrative of the story goes, you can fully take that. But I mean, it can just as easily be someone else, just even if the idea is, even if one of the ideas being championed is this happens to everyone. So it's, it could be a different girl, same kind of situation, maybe a situation where just one of them's involved. But still, the point is ultimately that, this happens to those classes and we still have to take care of. Obviously, the most obvious link is that it's Eva, but I just want you to think of what he's also saying with that. Okay, so yeah, that's kind of that. And obviously, whenever you're kind of writing this, you plan, mention the points, quote, explain the meaning, and then analyze some language. Link to other characters, ideas, and points in the book or in the play somehow, as much as you can, 4 or 5 times, and use developed vocabulary. One thing I'd like to say about these tutorial videos overall is that I've had a couple of messages saying, they shouldn't be on there. I don't actually know the age of the people putting them, maybe it's teachers, but I shouldn't be putting them on there because, it gives too much help. But really, my personal opinion is that in putting them up, I'm putting down everything that your teacher would have gone through with you. So sometimes people aren't, fully engaged for the whole lesson, and they might miss out on a couple of bits. So here's just a summary for you to actually use. There's no head starts, etc. Just trying to get people thinking, because hopefully the more students actually think about it and kind of make connections, then the more they'll kind of be interested in the work they're actually doing, rather than just trying to get grades. I would highly recommend to read Priestley's other plays as well that kind of deal with time manipulation. They're just superb. And again, just if you want to get the A-star, they help you give you reference to what's going on. One of them is called Time of the Conways, which is about breakdown of society in a different way. And I've been here before, which is a really interesting kind of play on time travel and how kind of things change when you make certain decisions or do certain things. Both brilliant, as is Inspector Calls and Inspector Falls, sorry. And I hope that was useful, and we'll be in touch with another video soon, because I'm going to start trying to do some online lessons, like live online lessons. So I'll give you more details of that within the near future. Good luck.